Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news.
I hope you're all well. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Today we're going to listen to a debate that Anthony, Kay and I had some time ago, and the question was about satanic ritual abuse. Is it exaggerated? Does it really exist? We had a debate about it, and I was arguing more in the case of yes, it's a big problem, and Anthony was more on the case of it's vastly exaggerated. So settle down, relax. Here's today's show. So today we're going to have a Sentinel debate, which we haven't had for quite a long time, and I should preclude this debate by saying that it's quite a big topic. We're basically looking at surface issues of this, and with a view to maybe bringing in some guests later on for a full-blown Truth Sentinel episode later on. We're basically going to be talking today about satanic ritual abuse, or SRA. And of course there's going to be loads of things that sort of intertwine with that, and we could go off at lots of tangents, and I'm sure we will sometimes. I think I read on Wikipedia that this was a moral panic that originated in the United States in the 1980s, although I would say I'm sure satanic ritual abuse, if we accept it does exist, probably goes back thousands of years, I would have thought. I'm sure the Mayans and people like that were involved in stuff which some people would say is satanic ritual abuse. And we'll come into some aspects of that later, because I think a lot of it depends on definitions again. What do you define as ritual? What you define as satanic? What your worldview is, and I think that could be an aspect of how people are going to have different opinions. But anyway, Anthony, welcome back to our Sentinel debate on SRA, satanic ritual abuse. It is a huge topic, right? I think you'd agree with that.
It is a really huge topic, but I'm ready for you, Scott. I'm in my corner. I don't know where my manager is, but he should be arriving any moment now.
I'm in my corner, and I'm a bit scared. I'm sort of looking around and looking at my notes and just wondering, am I ready for this fight, you know? But
God, we would be terrible professional boxers.
Well, I don't know. I did some Thai boxing the other day. I'm saying that satanic ritual abuse does exist, but that it depends on your worldview, and it depends on a lot of things, basically. Do you want to start on one aspect of it?
Sure, yeah. I'm going to argue that the vast majority of satanic ritual abuse cases are probably the result of false memories. Now, I have to say I'm not entirely 100% sure about this, but out of the suite of explanations available, this one seems considerably more likely to me than the others. I don't say that it explains all cases of satanic ritual abuse, but I'm saying it may explain the vast majority.
Okay, so I'm going to counter that by saying what you're talking about is actually probably a very small amount of cases. You're talking about cases where psychologists have kind of, almost in the same way as that lady we talked about, what was her name, Sally Morgan, and the way that some hypnotists prize information out of people, which perhaps isn't true, by suggestion. You're talking about those cases, and there's many thousands of cases that have nothing to do with that. And actually that false memory syndrome that you're talking about, there's an organization set up for that, and a lot of the people involved in it tend to be the people who've been accused of satanic ritual abuse. So I would say that no, this false memory syndrome is a red herring.
Okay. Look, I think one of the reasons why I lean towards this theory is because SRA emerged so suddenly, pretty much from nowhere in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, before that you had, I don't know, 1 or 2 cases a year, and suddenly you had thousands of cases.
I would just quickly like to come back at you with a jab and say you're just talking about the reporting of it. I mean, I'm sure thousands of years ago there may have been cases which had there been newspapers and media around, someone has said, this is satanic ritual abuse. So I would disagree. This was a phenomenon that occurred in the 1980s. You're just talking about the phrase SRA, satanic ritual abuse.
Well, it emerged mostly from psychotherapy sessions, which had been going on before the 1980s. But what basically happened was that there were people who had a particular problem. Let's say they were depressed, or they had some kind of behavioral disorder. They would go and get some therapy to help them deal with that, and then they'd come out of that therapy with a completely different and vastly more terrifying problem. And there weren't just a few of these. There, like I said, there were thousands. So what I'm saying to you is this. A particular set of psychotherapeutic tools, which were very popular at that time, have somehow produced unintended results in the minds of many people.
And I would completely agree with that. So we're in agreement there. I mean, I've read about these particular cases. I would say they're not a huge amount, but the media likes to try to make out that this is the main problem, but it's not. There's a relatively small amount of cases that are like this, and it is a method of extraction of information which is severely flawed. And any case where someone went in with headaches, came out saying that they'd been sexually abused for 30 years. First of all, you'd probably say that's very, very questionable. You still have to give them a chance. It might be that during that session of relaxation, they just felt comfortable enough to blurt out something that was true. But I would say it's very questionable technique. So I agree with you on that. But some of the cases I've read about have nothing to do with this.
I agree to an extent, but I do want to counter that. Before I do, though, let me come back to a point that you made before, which was that a lot of the people in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation have themselves been accused of child abuse. Some of the people in that organization have other somewhat unsavory ties to the CIA, for example, but not all of them. There is one in particular who I'm hoping we have a chance to talk about tonight called Elizabeth Loftus, and she's a psychological scientist. She did extensive research into false memories, and at a certain point she decided it's time to put this research forward, because in the face of this phenomenon that was happening, somebody needed to step up and say, well, look, we've been doing research on this and this is what we've found. And when she did that, she immediately was attacked. She received death threats. There were people organizing petitions, trying to get her hauled in front of ethics committees. But these people were not the people that you might expect to do this. There were two groups. There were feminists, because the feminist movement felt that her research might help some sex offenders to get off in court. Yeah? And the other group, were psychotherapists. So it wasn't like convicted criminals who she'd helped put in jail. It was professional psychotherapists and feminists. She got, as I said, a load of death threats. She was assaulted. It became really unpleasant for her. She had to have an armed guard with her whenever she appeared publicly. Now, I can't say with absolute certainty that Elizabeth Loftus is not part of the conspiracy, but I tend to feel that what's happened is she has come out with this and then being labelled as a child abuser or whatever, rather than being labelled as a child abuser and come out with this in response. I think it's happened the other way around.
Okay, I would like to address that issue and say,
sure.
In a lot of these debates and a lot of these situations we argue about, there's people who hold views and then they're also attacked, no matter what the case is. You know, if it, for example, it was abortion, you're going to get people coming and attacking you. The fact that someone's attacked, assaulted, even violently attacked or even killed, that makes no difference to the argument. All it is an event in the debate. It's nothing to do with actually whether satanic ritual abuse exists or not.
I agree, but it was at this point at which people started to say, oh, she's part of the what was it called, False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and therefore she's evil, and so on and so on and so on. Nobody was saying that before. She didn't counter with her research. These accusations were a counter to her research. So, yeah, anyway, look, I actually wanted to talk about, speaking of questionable, one very interesting source of information about this is actually a report published by the FBI, of all people. This report was written by a guy called Kenneth Lanning, and he was an agent in the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, which really needs a shorter name. And basically, this was 1992. He was basically trying to make this a kind of compendium of what the authorities had learned up to that point about SRA. And he talks about the evidence and the testimonies that are gathered in these cases Now, looking at his take on it gives, I think, quite an interesting perspective on the SRA issue. First of all, he said there had been an emergence of what he called multidimensional child sex rings in the 80s, and these were a huge challenge for the FBI to investigate because their characteristics were so different to what he called traditional child sexual abuse cases, right? So obviously multiple victims, multiple offenders, but also an unusually high proportion of female offenders, something like 40 to 50%. And in some cases, they did seem to be molesting these children for reasons other than sexual pleasure. So that is one of the criteria that you need to use for ritual sexual abuse. It's done for reasons other than sexual pleasure, or it's a mixture of sexual pleasure and other reasons. Yeah? And that did seem to be the case in some of these child sex rings. So something very disturbing was happening. But he pointed out that whenever these allegations involved a ritual component, things got very fuzzy for a number of reasons. First, most allegations of satanic ritual abuse would be made first to local law enforcement agencies. So in other words, people would go and report it to the police, and then those agencies would pass it on to others, like the FBI. But he found that a lot of the police officers who handled the initial cases had no real idea what they were doing through no fault of their own, and that they were basing their understanding of words like Satanism and ritual and occult on either zero knowledge or on knowledge mostly gained from the media, by which I imagine he means like horror movies, tabloid news, and so on. So they were reporting all kinds of things as ritual abuse that turned out to be just abuse. Now, that was the first thing. Secondly, there was then at a certain point a particular breed of people who appeared on the scene and made things much worse. Now, these were people who, I suppose, were jumping on a bandwagon and were claiming to be specially trained to detect signs of satanic ritual abuse. And then the numbers of cases, of course, went through the roof, because what do you do if you're trained to detect signs of satanic ritual abuse? You detect signs of satanic ritual abuse, you know. So, yeah, there was also another issue. The adult survivors of these ritual sexual abuse were frequently telling investigators things that were just physically impossible. So one common claim was people would say that they had been cut up and put back together, or that the person they were accusing had taken a building apart and then rebuilt it, and things like this. And there were also lots of allegations that were like technically possible but very unlikely. So Lanning considered these, but he put them into the unlikely basket. Things like cannibalism and vampirism. He was prepared to admit that there might be cannibals out there preying on children. He was prepared to admit that there might be people out there who believed they were vampires, or even real vampires, doing the same thing. But when he investigated these claims, he found almost all of them to be untrue, and the same with claims of human sacrifice organised by satanic cults, which was another frequent thing.
See, I'm going to step in. I'm going to say I don't like it when people try to discredit an argument because I'm talking about the police here, because they consider it unlikely. Because we live in an extremely odd world where people do extremely odd things. Cannibalism, for example, there's proven cases of that. We know it exists. If someone, if there was a case of cannibalism, they went to the police, said, "My neighbour just gouged someone's eyes out and ate them," and the police just said, "I'm sorry, that falls into the unlikely department. Please go away." When in fact, 2 months ago in England, a guy did exactly that, gouged a woman's eyes out and ate them.
He did, and these things do happen, and I don't think anybody would deny that. Well, I mean, it would be silly to deny that. But his idea was, these are things that happen far less often, but I'm going to investigate them anyway. And there were real problems when these investigations happened. First of all, no remains were ever found. No remains of victims of human sacrifice. No remains of cannibalism. No remains of attacks by people who believed they were vampires.
Okay, I have to step in here. No remains of cannibalism. It kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Yes and no. But consider this.
I mean, if I eat a chicken, the flesh is gone, and I can quite easily get rid of the bones. So no remains, I think, is a poor example of lack of evidence.
We'll put it this way: investigators would obviously one of the first questions that investigators would ask would be, where are the remains? And some survivors would say there are no remains, but many would say, oh yes, the remains are here or here or here. So then the investigators would go and look for the remains, and look, they looked hard. In many cases, the FBI, for example, did major building excavations to get under buildings where abuse victims had claimed bodies were buried. They didn't find a single one. And what would happen when they went back and confronted the SRA survivor with a lack of evidence is the victim would usually have a response like prepared and ready to go. So here are the most common responses that they would give. First one, the offenders moved the bodies after they left. Second one, the bodies were burned in portable high-temperature ovens. Third one, the bodies were put in double-decker graves under already buried bodies. Or a member of the cult was a professional mortician and he or she had disposed of the bodies in a crematorium. Next one, the offenders ate the bodies, including the bones, the gristles, the organs, and so on, which you don't eat when you eat a chicken. Or the cannibals, in cases of cannibalism, cannibals ate the corpses of already dead people or aborted fetuses. So we can't say, go and find this person who's been murdered because they dug up dead people.
Okay, first of all, in Thailand they do eat the internal organs of a chicken. So it depends where you are, I would say. I would also say
1 point to you. But I guess I'll just finish this list. The last one on the list, also a very popular story, was that the power of Satan had caused the bodies to disappear.
Okay, I would say the idea that they'd moved the bodies, that's not particularly unbelievable. That could be entirely possible. I mean, especially when you're talking about satanic ritual abuse. Sometimes there might be a satanic ritual, a reason for moving the body. I mean, there could be any number of reasons, or that these people knew that there was going to be a police investigation and move the bodies. That's what people do before crimes. A second thing, and this one goes into the sort of worldwide conspiracy angle. I mean, there's a lot of people believe there's a worldwide conspiracy with rich and powerful people, including politicians, presidents, popes involved in satanic ritual abuse, and that actually the heads of police departments are involved in this as well. So if that is the case, let's assume that we do have a corrupt police force, and I'm not, of course, saying everybody. I'm saying there could be corrupt police force leaders, and so they may have the power to say, go and search here instead, or you're not to report on what you find there. These are powerful people, so if there is a cover-up, and I'm not suggesting it's in every case, but I believe there are cases of cover-ups of let's just say child abuse first of all.
Oh, yeah, well, there's no doubt about that at all. No doubt about that.
It's been proven in the UK. We have a serious problem over here in the UK at the moment, and there's proven cases of police cover-ups regarding child abuse. And I'll quote Jimmy Savile, the DJ, who appears to be one of the worst ever child abuse offenders, also involved in satanic ritual abuse, and was known by the police for for decades, and there's police chiefs involved in the cover-up of that. So bodies not being in the place, I'd say possible police corruption.
Okay, but let's assume for a moment that there are some people, let's say in the police, for example, or in city councils, things like this, that are involved. Okay. Then let's go back to the numbers. Now, people who made allegations about mass ritual sexual abuse in the 80s and 90s, I don't know if it's commonly the case today, but this was the time when this issue came up. Yeah? People who made those allegations often said that the victims were abducted or missing children, runaway children, derelicts, and the babies of breeder women, right? Now, we have no numbers on the last group, but there are numbers on all of the other groups, and they're not huge. So in the US at the time, figures estimated that somewhere between 52 and 158 children per year were abducted and killed by non-family members, right? Whereas if you add up all the body count implicit in all the SRA testimonies, you were talking about tens of thousands of people, which is way more than could go unnoticed. And in fact, in the 1990s, if you were to add up all the murders committed in the US, the total was about 23,000 annually. Whereas if you calculated a body count based on accounts of satanic ritual abuse, you'd get about twice that number. So if the accounts of SRA survivors were true, that would mean the murder rate in the USA had tripled without anybody noticing, which is clearly not very likely.
Okay, I would just straight away say whenever numbers are involved, I just find everyone's got their own version of statistics. It's very, very difficult. I've heard people say they started investigating satanic ritual abuse and missing children first of all, and they started investigating state by state how many children had gone missing and were still not found state by state, and they were just absolutely dumbfounded, and it was in the hundreds of thousands going missing, on a regular basis. And I reckon if you check the statistics worldwide of how many missing people there are, if you were the kind of person who wanted to show that actually this is not a problem, you're going to say, there's only 10,000 missing people every year. If you're someone who thinks this is a big problem, you're going to say, I've done my research. There's 50 million people who go missing every year. So I find the numbering thing. Whenever I listen, you can listen to different podcasts with different people with different kind of views, and the numbers are just change all the time. So I just find it's a problem. It's a problem with statistics.
Fair enough. And I mean, we've seen Obama do it with the reclassification of civilians. Do you know about that? Yeah. So anybody who's in a zone where there's a drone attack. Whoops, we're talking about drones again. When a drone strike happens, anyone in the vicinity who is a male of military age is assumed to be a combatant, unless the American intelligence services have specific information about that person to say they're not a combatant. So in that way, he can reclassify civilian casualties as militants who were killed just by saying, well, we don't have any evidence to say that dead guy over there isn't a militant, so we're going to count him as one.
Exactly. There's a problem with the collation of statistics, but also with where you read it. I just find there's massive differences. I'm not just talking 10 or 20. I'm talking there can be hundreds of thousands of numbers of different. So I don't know who to believe.
Fair enough. But do you think it's likely that the murder rate in the US tripled and nobody noticed?
No idea, to be honest.
Yeah. Fair enough. By the way, about community leaders. Again, it does unfortunately come back to the numbers, but in a far more.
I thought you were going to say Nazis then.
It comes back to the numbers, but in a far more general sense than the numbers which the Nazis employed.
Well, actually, I only said that as a joke, but I'm sure that some people would say they were involved in satanic ritual abuse anyway. So.
Oh God, yeah, Nazis and the occult. Now that's an episode. Yeah, talking more generally about numbers, I think the large number of people who are meant to be involved in this conspiracy is, in some ways, one of the things that makes it less likely. So for example, you've got, 2 or 3 people in different communities who murder a few children, right? Mm-hmm. And nobody finds out. That's quite possible. You've got 2 or 3 people who murder some children in their communities and who have connections to the big house, to City Hall. Sorry. Nobody finds out because of their connections. Also possible. Yeah. Thousands of people doing the same thing. That would require hundreds of communities all over the country to be run by mayors and police chiefs and other community leaders who are practicing Satanists and all willing to stay silent so they can continue murdering and eating people. A few, yes, but thousands, I think, is stretching it.
I would say the idea that there's thousands of leaders, police chiefs around the world who are corrupt and evil and up to evil stuff, I would say is very believable.
Yeah, but the idea that they're all practicing Satanists and cannibals is a little bit more specific.
Agree.
Yanukovych, was he a practicing Satanist and a cannibal, do you think?
Phew, I don't know. That's another program.
It is. I mean, it's possible, but it doesn't seem overly likely, does it?
I don't think there's ever been an allegation about that
No.
at all.
If we found out sometime down the track that he was one, then we wouldn't immediately say, well, that's impossible. But if we found out that about every single president of every Central and Eastern European country, we'd start to think, that's a bit of a coincidence. Or about every mayor of every town in Ukraine. It's too much. No.
There's a certain amount of exaggeration about this for sure, and especially we talked about the 80s and the 90s. During that period, there especially was an exaggeration of some of this by some groups that were just blaming everything. You know, it was a bit like, you know, if you're listening to heavy metal music, then you're probably a Satanist or you're going to do evil things. Or if you watch, you know, not snuff movies, horror films, you're more likely to kill people. If you play video games, then, or you're listening to rap music with negative lyrics, it's the same kind of thing. There was a kind of mass hysteria about all of this. But I think that the satanic ritual abuse thing could possibly be big enough that it's significant rather than being absolutely huge, and definitely not involving all Satanists. I think there's different types of Satanists. I don't want to be offensive to some of the Satanists out there, but for some young people, you go through a bit of a stage in your life where you want to become part of a group. You know, you might want to dress up in black and say you're a Satanist and listen to that type of music, and it's just to become part of a group. And then you might switch to something else, like, you know, like in the UK we had the mods and the rockers, and some people, you know, some teenagers listening might find that offensive, but that's a fact. I went through that stage myself. I went through morphed into different characters, and, you know, to find yourself somewhat. And there's the low-level Satanists who are just, in some ways, just playing a game. And then there's the real ones, you know, that are taking it to another level.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I think you've just ruined the debate, because I agreed with pretty much everything you said for the last 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh, damn.
Though I did want to qualify before round one finishes, though, that when you talk about different kinds of Satanists, you're absolutely right. Well done, points to you. But we should definitely not consider them as being like teen Satanists in one group and you know, murderers in the other. I think most Satanists are actually, well, a very large number of Satanists are actually neither. They're following a philosophy which, although you and I could argue about, you know, its reactionary nature and so on, as we have before, they're following a philosophy which is neither a fad nor something which involves killing people. So yeah, just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Let's why don't we go back to our corners, speak to our managers, have a bit of a drink of water, and come back in a couple of minutes. That was round one. So we're back from our break, rejuvenated, relaxed, and ready to go again. Anthony, you had a few points you wanted to ask me about.
Yeah, I did. I was going to just run by you a few alternative explanations that have been posited for this SRA phenomenon. The first one that I wanted to run by you is pathological disorders. So here we'd be talking about mental disorders that result in people doing things like to an obsessive degree, like seeking attention or seeing the world in mythic terms. What do you think about that as an explanation?
Well, I think if we took, say the number of cases of the people say are satanic ritual abuse, amongst them there's going to be percentages of different explanations for them, and that would be one of them.
Okay. What about people who have traumatic memories and those memories become distorted because they are so traumatic? Again,
just a very small percentage.
Okay. Overzealous.
I think that's going to be my answer to all your points, isn't it?
It certainly seems like it. Overzealous psychotherapists, police, other people looking too hard for something that they've been told to expect to find.
I would combat that with saying there's also a massive phenomenon of the complete opposite, and we've seen that in the UK with a huge amount of child abuse cases where they've been completely ignored. And then you can look at, again, I'll quote Jimmy Savile. You're talking about thousands and thousands of cases that were ignored over decades by police. So I would say maybe that used to be more of a problem in the 80s and 90s, but now it's the opposite.
What about violence and the occult in the media culture?
What do you mean?
Well, to take a step back, the satanic ritual abuse phenomenon emerged concurrently with the alien abduction phenomenon, which I don't really want to get into here because I actually think there is reasonably good evidence for some cases of alien abduction, and it's definitely the topic for a whole other show. But it has been said that these are kind of, if you like, urban legends for our time. So this is something which in the media and movies and so on has become a kind of leitmotif, and that perhaps, when people have very traumatic experiences in their lives, they try to relate to those experiences through things which they know that exist in the culture, and two newer things that exist in the culture are the modern idea of satanic ritual abuse as opposed to older forms of the idea, and alien abduction.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to this idea about false memories again, and talking about this under therapy, it can be a bit similar to the past lives idea and the alien abduction thing. And I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about real life cases. In fact, where there might be deceased children here, which is pretty difficult, pretty easy to prove because they're dead. Those real cases, not people who've sort of under therapy. And you say this is a phenomenon that started occurring in the media as well. You're talking about a specific thing that started occurring in the 80s and 90s with regarding therapy and alien abduction. There were cases of people saying they were abducted by aliens under therapy. Personally, I'm a skeptic against that. I'm not a skeptic against people who tell other people they were abducted by aliens necessarily. I think there's too many of them to discredit entirely. But I'm totally skeptical about anyone who under therapy suddenly said that they were abducted by aliens. I'm a bit of a skeptic against that. I'm not saying they're all lying. I'm just saying it doesn't seem like a great method of extracting the truth. So I'm totally with you on that. But I'm saying that these are two clear different things, and that we should not think that satanic ritual abuse started in the 80s and 90s. It started thousands of years ago.
What about the idea that the consistency of all the testimonies about satanic ritual abuse is evidence that something else is going on? So the idea that, look, if it were a real phenomenon, there would be vastly different details emerging in different cases, but there aren't. They tend to be very uniform, and that's a downfall of the idea that these things are really happening.
You can't have it both ways. In some cases, people are accused of things, and there's inconsistencies. Therefore, the whole case falls apart. You can't then say, "Look at all the consistencies. This is ridiculous." You can't. I just think that's it's a very shallow, very kind of weak idea. That the fact that there's consistencies in people's testimonies means it probably didn't happen. It's possible. I see what you're saying. It's almost like contrived, but I think you can't have it both ways. You can't say inconsistencies means this is false, consistencies means this is false. It's not a very strong. It's not a very strong argument, I would say.
Okay, the idea that subliminal messages delivered via the media are causing people to make up stories about satanic ritual abuse in order to deflect attention away from real things that have happened to these people.
That's a bit deep, that one. I mean, some people say these subliminal messages in the media are actually causing them to commit such satanic ritual abuse, and that it depends on your worldview again, doesn't it? I mean, if you believe there's a devil, there's demons, and that they sort of infiltrate the media and start sending out messages, and people start hearing voices in their head, is this media manipulation, or is this the devil? Again, I think this is where I wanted to say something about it depends on your worldview and your world beliefs.
Yeah.
If you don't believe in God or Satan, I think you're going to have a problem with the idea of satanic ritual abuse. And I think this is the case with a lot of the cases that maybe are occurring, is that scientists or people of a scientific or highly logical nature who reject the spiritual aspect of the world are going to have a big problem with the idea that satanic ritual abuse exists because of their different idea about the world.
Okay, and that will, yeah. I mean, you sort of went on to my next question, which was going to be: do you think it's possible that subliminal messages have been responsible for people actually carrying out these bizarre acts?
I think that possibly they have, but not necessarily by the media directly. I think we're going into the subject of mind control now, and things like MK Ultra, which are again proven cases. The CIA conducted mind control experiments. The Nazis did. They used messages to make people do things. It's a proven phenomenon that can occur, and probably has occurred in the past. So absolutely yes, subliminal messages could cause people to do things. Now, whether that's satanic, again, I refer to my previous statement about your ideas on the world and your spiritual, whether you're going to accept there could be a spiritual aspect to the world as well.
All right. So my next one was going to be, I've got two more points on my list. One is the CIA connection, which also you've touched on there, and the other one is false memories. In terms of false memories, I want to talk again about this woman, Elizabeth Loftus. As I said, she's a very controversial figure, but it's also been said that she's done more to document the unreliability of memory than any other researcher. And she's been called, this is why she's controversial, or part of it, she's been called as an expert witness in hundreds of legal cases. Some of those have been really high profile. So she was involved in the Rodney King case, the Oklahoma bombings. She was consulted on Bosnian war crimes. She was even an expert witness at the first trial of the serial killer Ted Bundy. And she helped to convict him, though, as it turned out, he escaped. But she talks about a database which exists in the US. It's a database of people wrongly convicted of crimes before the days of DNA evidence, and then later pardoned after the DNA evidence has put them in the clear. And her claim is that in 3/4 of all those cases, false memory is the reason why these people ended up in prison. She likes to say that memory is like a Wikipedia page. You can go in and change your own memory, and so can other people. And she's done a ton of experiments to back this up. Some of these experiments have been going on for I think she started in the 70s, but a lot more people got interested in this after the SRA phenomenon. So I'll give you one example of her experiments. It's an often quoted one. She takes a group of subjects and they become witnesses to a car crash. Yeah. Then she asks one group of subjects, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? And she asks the other group, how fast were the cars going when they slammed into each other? And of course, the second group estimates higher speeds for the cars. But then they're asked the follow-up question, was there any broken glass? And more people in the second group answered yes, just based on the fact that she's replaced the word hit with the words slammed into. That was enough to alter their memories of the experience. And there was no shattered glass in the accident. So these people have had a false memory planted very, very simply via suggestion. And there have been dozens of experiments like this. I'll give you another example, which was... Sorry, go on, please.
I was going to say, no need for another example, because I think it's going to basically say the same kind of thing. And I would say what you've just said there has discredited her own research.
Why?
By proving that bias the way you say something can manipulate the result. So, in fact, her accusations that a lot of these cases are the result of false memories. You can manipulate any situation to have the result you want it to, especially if you're someone like a lawyer. I think all she did there with that particular case was show that the way you word things, when you have bias, it can change the result. And so her entire research on false memories, she has bias in believing that that's the result. That's why people committed these offences, because the false memory syndrome is fake. So, she may be right.
No, not at all. Because this is quite different to like push polling, where you ask leading questions to get people to say they're going to vote for a particular candidate. You're not changing people's minds about things. You're changing their actual memories. So people who were given one question remembered one thing. People who were given another question remembered another thing. Now, Loftus was invited in to look at this SRA phenomenon, and her issue again was with the physical evidence. So she gives an example of a woman who came out of psychotherapy earnestly believing that she'd suffered years of ritual abuse, that she was forced into a pregnancy and then the baby was cut from her belly. She was examined by doctors, and there's no evidence at all of any disturbance of the tissue.
We've already agreed that of course this was just false practice. You cannot get somebody to go in and it's going to be very dubious. Put it that way. It's a bit like getting a confession under torture. If you get a confession under torture, let me explain before. Yeah. If you get someone to confess against a crime under torture, it may be that they actually did commit the crime and they just admitted to it, but you used torture to get the result.
Yeah, so they're not reliable.
So you can't really rely on that. So I would say that's the same with false memory syndrome.
Well, I think that's true.
Some of these people, they may have been satanically ritually abused, but you can't use that method, and it's very dubious, in fact.
But these were the people who we were talking about before, who went into therapy with one quite manageable disorder and came out with these memories of satanic ritual abuse. And when these people were surveyed en masse, what was found was that they were all using quite a specific set of psychotherapeutic techniques, and these were just popular at the time. Some of them still are, and most of them are quite innocuous. Things like imagination exercises, dream interpretation, hypnosis, and then some are less innocuous, like deliberately exposing people to false information to see how they react. Those were all things that psychotherapists were using, and still are in many cases. So then you had, as I said, this became more and more popular as an object of research. For example, a study in Canada where researchers implanted the memory in their subjects that as a child they were attacked by a vicious animal. Now, they implanted this memory just by suggestion, and in 50% of cases they were successful. 50% of the people came out of those sessions absolutely convinced that when they were a kid they'd been attacked by a vicious animal.
Yeah, but this means nothing. This is just hypnotism, and we've already agreed that this is nothing to do with satanic ritual abuse. In some cases, it is, but a lot of the cases I looked at were nothing to do with this. They involved no such people going in to see a therapist and then coming out. There's hundreds of thousands. I'll correct that. Thousands of cases internationally, and I'm going to list some of them soon. And these are only the ones that reported. I would suggest that there's a lot of these cases that aren't reported because the victims are dead, basically. And they're well hidden because you're talking about powerful people. But I would say let's move away from the I totally agree with you on the false memory and the therapeutic practices, but I would say this is fairly small. You would probably disagree that it's small.
I disagree. I think it's a significant number of the cases. I mean, I think if you subtracted the cases which have come out of psychotherapy, I don't think it would be nearly as much of a talked about phenomenon as it is.
Okay, well, I just wanted to quickly say also, most of the cases I came across, we're not talking about what the victim said. We're actually talking about what the perpetrator said.
Mm-hmm.
That they were Satanists, that this, and that the evidence of what they did, and they didn't even deny it. So what about those cases? That's nothing to do with any of this, and there's plenty of them. I'm going to list, and I'm going to do it later.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you a list of case after case of people who the perpetrators admitted that they worshipped Satan, and this was the reason, and this was part of it, and this was a ritual. The evidence was there. The victim also agreed if they were still alive, and in many cases they weren't still alive. So what's that got? I mean, what's that got to do with therapists?
All right, so let's move off the false memory. Let's talk about some of the less reputable people involved in this. So we mentioned before there is this organization called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and one of the guys in that foundation is a guy called Dr. Bekharov, like the drink Bekharovka.
Oh, I like that drink.
He worked for a horrible right-wing think tank in the US called the American Enterprise Institute, or AEI. They're still around. You can find their website. The AEI, it's widely considered to be a major force behind some of the policies of the second Bush administration. So basically, not a nice guy. But when he wasn't busy planning the new American century, he wrote books and articles about how children falsely accuse their parents of sexual abuse. And these are not all cases that come out of psychotherapy. This is kids just saying, my mum and dad abused me. And many of them, or some of them, say, my mum and dad dressed up in Satan costumes and abused me in a ritual where they drew pentagrams on the floor, etc., etc. Now, I have to say, I mean, I've read a couple of Bekharov's articles, and he does actually seem sincere in this way, that he's not only writing about false reporting of child abuse, he also is concerned with underreporting of child abuse. So he seems to be that he's trying to get the balance right. We should be encouraging people to come forward, but on the other hand, we should also be ready for the possibility that not all the evidence they give will be reliable. And I think both of those things are sound.
Well, actually, I just wanted to say something about this.
Sure.
This children making things up thing. I don't like that at all, I must say. And if there are, and I believe there are, people in high positions of power, lawyers, policemen, politicians, world leaders, psychiatrists even, who are trying to cover this up, of course, this kind of thing that, we shouldn't believe what children say, would be a way to go. And yeah. I remember when I was a child, even though I'm getting on a bit, and I remember that I knew when I was telling the truth and when I was lying, and so did my parents a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the case with most people. You've got children. You can probably, or at least later on, maybe you'll get a feel for when your child is lying and when they're telling the truth. And I would say, if a child, if something's been extracted from a child using dubious therapies, then yes, I would agree with you. That's dubious. But if they come up to you and started telling you things that, wow, this is stuff that this kid could not just be making up, and it's disgusting, it's vile, and it's in the unlikely section which you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. I would be inclined to take them seriously, and I think they always have to be taken seriously. Mm-hmm. Children do make things up, but I think if they're making up something of a very, very serious nature and there's no motivation for them to be lying, they've got to be listened to.
Yeah. I would tend to agree. And the argument against people like Bekharov is that they are trying to cover for some very, very serious things. And one of those, you mentioned before, a conspiracy of, people within government and so on. One of those is the possibility that the CIA was involved or has been involved in child sex trafficking.
It totally wouldn't surprise me. The CIA are an extremely corrupt organization. I mean, you look at some of the things they've done in the past. I mean, you only have to look at that one thing the mind control experiments. That's just one small aspect to realize how evil these people can be. Dragging people off the streets and trying to erase their minds. This actually happened. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I agree. But I've been trying to think, what would be the CIA's motivation? Okay, let's for a moment, entertain this idea that the CIA is a major child sex trafficker. What would their motivation be? Do you think? I mean, one idea I had was
money.
Well,
money and the fact they're evil, basically.
Well, they're evil. One idea I had was perhaps it's done as a sweetener on other alliances that they're trying to forge. Do you think there's any possibility of that?
I think it's done to control people as well. I mean, there's been a lot of people who've made the accusation that some of the politicians, prime ministers, presidents have been caught in compromising situations with children.
Yeah.
Maybe not in satanic ritual abuse, but in child abuse, and that is then used against them to completely control what they do, say, laws they pass, those things.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, and another iteration of the story is that they're trying to cover up for pedophile rings within senior political circles of the USA. So, in the USA, sorry. So, for example, do you remember the Boys Town scandal?
Yeah. I know a little bit about it, but not enough.
I remember it because Boys Town was huge in Australia, and I remember they used to do a lottery, and in my old workplace we used to all go into the lottery, so I've indirectly helped fund some pretty horrible stuff. But
I'm sure we all have.
Yeah.
I bought a can of Coke yesterday.
You bastard. But no, look, the Boys Town scandal hit while George Bush Senior was president, and there have been suggestions that senior political figures, including him, were in attendance at some of the kind of pedophile sex parties that Boys Town organised. So
not only in attendance, that there are accusations against him, and I'm going to have to add allegedly, that he was completely involved in them and that he's sexually abused children. Anyone who wants to check out that could listen to a recent podcast with David Icke on the Richie Allen show. These are allegations. Whether we should believe them, I don't know, but David Icke was the guy that alleged that Jimmy Savile was involved in a paedophile ring and supplying children to positions of high power decades ago. It's been proven correct. So if he says these people are involved in it too, I'd be inclined to take him seriously. I believe I'm someone who can filter out just stuff that doesn't have much evidence behind it. And I've come to the conclusion he's right, that this is a worldwide problem. Because I think we're talking about at least thousands of world leaders and politicians. I'd probably say hundreds of thousands, or at least tens of thousands. As to the amount of victims, it's difficult to say, isn't it? But I would say it's considerable, certainly. Considerable enough that we can't say the phenomenon is not true. We can say there's cases that are not true. We could say there's a reasonable amount of cases, especially when it comes to people who've been it's been extracted through some kind of dodgy therapy. But I think I would still argue this is massive, a massive problem. But then again, I would say there are some blurred lines here between child abuse and satanic child abuse. And I did in doing some research, and both of us we need to do further research. We're going to get some guests on. But in doing the research, I did find there was blurred lines. There seemed to be people who were supposed to be talking about satanic ritual abuse when it looked like, to me, child abuse. Child abuse.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but then again, I think that again goes to your worldview, your belief in the spiritual world. If someone, for example, rapes a baby or a child, and we talk about Ian Watkins, who was a Satanist, who did rape a child and wanted to tried to rape more as well. Now, let's say he wasn't a Satanist. Let's say he didn't say he was a Satanist. Is what he did satanic in nature? It depends on your worldview, you see. So some people might be classing some cases of murder and child abuse as satanic, when other people would say, no, that's not satanic at all. That's just murder, So I think some of these cases do involve that blurred line as well.
Yeah, fair point. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective, but yeah, you're right.
We did go on to chat a lot more about this topic, but unfortunately there's not enough time to listen to it today. Thanks for listening to today's show, and I hope you'll tune in next week. Remember, you can find us at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. That's www.truthsentinel.co.uk. And I've put up the latest episodes, some more on the way, so it's always worth checking out that website, and also going to our YouTube channel, Truth Sentinel with Scott. There's 2 channels actually, Truth Sentinel with Scott 1 and Truth Sentinel 2. Try and find them and subscribe as well, so you get all our episodes. Also on the website you can find t-shirts at trutht-shirts.com, and if you use the code TRUTH1 you'll get a 10% discount, and we get a small donation from that company. I hope you have a good week, and I hope you're listening again soon. Thanks. Goodbye.